we'll get underway. If everyone can mute their microphones unless they're talking, that'd be good. I think we know everyone on the call, so we don't need to do any introductions. But tonight it was just an opportunity to have a chat with, I guess, Bill and Sol, and Bill Malcolm and Ken Solly, and myself. Just to talk generally about where things are at, and I guess people are reassessing businesses after a relatively tough period. So I thought it was a good opportunity to have a chat. Obviously, plenty of people will listen to this recorded version and watch it. So we'll rattle on, and people will join as we go. I guess why we call it the Mallee Mines, we all grew up within about 15 k's of each other at different stages, but all their family farms close to each other around Hopeton in the Mallee of Victoria. So that's the sort of impetus around why we thought we'd bring the three of us together. But obviously we've worked together in various forms. Bill actually taught me at university, taught me everything I know about economics, which is probably not heaps, but I've had a fair bit to do with each other in the last couple of years, which has been great. And obviously, Ken and I have had interacted various times over the years as well. So great opportunity tonight just to have a chat, and I'll just try and put some guide rails up, but otherwise it's a free for all. So ask your questions, have your opinions, and we can have a good chat. That's the point of evenings like this. But I guess we might start off with you, Ken. What are you seeing out there? I suppose it's been just certainly a tougher 6 months than many people might have farmed through. What have you seen? What are you seeing happening?
I think I've seen that quite a few people have realised the errors of some of their decision making when the times were good, and I've always been reminded throughout my life that expenses always rise to meet income, and I delivered about 70 cost of production workshops for MLA probably 10 years ago, I reckon, and the cost of production was around $3 a kilo, and I reckon now there's a lot of over $5, and we've always got to keep our eye on the margin. But most importantly is learn the lessons out of, it's the decisions you make in good times that get you through the bad times, I reckon. I've come across a good colleague of mine the other day, and he just said to me, we're not making any money at the moment. But he just said, probably our saving grace, so we've got a few FMDs. Well, that's the nature of agriculture, going up and down and that sort of thing. But sort of being a little bit suburbanised now in Warrnambool, I don't mix with farmers perhaps quite as much as I used to. So perhaps I haven't quite got my finger on the pulse as I should have. But and I notice some of the groups that I work with now, like Lifetime U groups, they're pretty much all young people now, and they're sons and daughters, and I don't think I'll hang around to train the third generation, but it's there's a fair bit of complacency when times were good, and I reckon they're just learning the lessons out of good times now. Because in my career, the three things that you wanted to line up, like price, season, cost of money, all those things rarely lined up. But in the last 5 or 6 years, up until the last 12 months, those three things were lining up, and that's we've got a unique situation there, so you've got to make the best of that opportunity as it comes along. And when you get the cost of money down as low as what it was, you can understand why people would want to really have a go. But when people talk about interest rates being high now, I don't think they're high at all. I think they're in a manageable level, I reckon they're high when they get into double digits, but a lot of people are crying poor because high interest rates. Well, I don't think they are, but that might spur a question.
Indeed, and if there's any questions, just shout in. But I guess we are where we are. Bill, what's your thoughts on setting yourself up from here in terms of good business, I guess, health and decisions around what are the principles around sailing through or from here to the next better times?
Well, yeah, it's almost un-Australian to actually make good use of the proceeds of a boom, and we've done it with mining booms and all that, and we dissipate it. But regression to the mean's a powerful concept, and that whole idea that things are good, they can only get better, or things are bad, it can only get worse is 100% wrong way to think. I left the Mallee. I lived and worked and played footy and cricket there and all that for the first 20 years of my life. And I just realised that's bloody near 50 years ago. But yeah, you get formed in those years because I've always had this interest in risk and fluctuations and things. But like the rule in the Australian side of agriculture, not so much maybe across the Tasman, but you get three good years in 10. You've got to make the money then and then use it well. Ken and I, we might as well only have me or Ken here because we say the same things in a way. But like all the benefits, we've had the perfect storm the last 3 years. And I was up in the Mallee before Christmas. As I was saying, I've never seen it look so good, and I've never seen it farm so well. So I'm really impressed with, we know how to farm it far better than we did 20 years or 30 years ago. Go back to the 70s when Ferguson's bloody sand was blown across onto our farm. That no longer happens. I went and had a look at that hill and it no longer happens. So we're farming better. But, perfect storm, as Ken said. Wet, rain, high prices, high yields, low interest rates, banks willing to lend. And all of that, I would say, is now capitalised into land values. So now it's the next step. As Ken said, that's why they have reserves. But now's the time to think about strategically, I reckon. Like we always talk about the 1%ers, and that's absolutely correct. There's been a lot of talk about getting those 1%, and the successful farmers do that. But that's within the system they're managing, right? They get all the bits right of that system. I talk about the big percenters. So 1%ers are tactical, and you've got to get that right. But I think the big percenters, the strategic ones, are the ones that are going to set you up for the next generation and keep you out of going broke and all that sort of thing. And so 1%ers is within a system. 2% is this. And I reckon, my attitude to risk, I guess, would be portfolio oriented in that I'd say, okay, now land values have gone up enormously. I've got enormous investment in agriculture. A little bit of portfolio, get something out of agriculture, because when those good times, well, they've run out. Some farmers, they mightn't see that for another 20 or 30 years or ever. So that's how I'd be thinking about it, Mark. I'd be thinking, geez, well, I've been in long enough. I've waited long enough for this big win. I've got an asset now that I never dreamt would have so many zeros attached to it. And I'd be thinking now, one, succession, start. Like they say, the best time to plan for succession is now. The best time was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And it takes a bit of getting used to having all those noughts on the end of your asset values. I once knew the guy who worked at Janet Holmes Court. He was, when Robert Holmes Court died, I can't remember his name, but I had a few lunches with him, and he sort of took over running the pastoral holdings. And I said, he'd just been a really good farm manager. And I said, how'd you get on handling all these big numbers? Oh, he said, it's no different, he said. You just put your thumb over a couple of the noughts. So the thing is, that's what we're going to – the principles don't change, but our equity's gone up, our gearing's come down, we're sitting on 95, really high equity, perhaps highest equity many of our farmers have seen for a long, long time. And the really smart thing, as Ken was alluding to, is now let's make strategic decisions that are going to really pay off in the longer term. I'll be putting a lot of thought into saying, what are we going to do with all this equity? Because you don't want too little equity and you don't want too much if you want to grow your business. You've got to use debt. So now, lovely question. Now, how am I going to use it to the best advantage? So that's how, if I was farming, Ken and Mark, that's how I'd be thinking.
And Ferg, timing isn't something, it's everything. And one of the things I've noticed with that people have tried to expand in recent time, there's been some very, what I'd call average operators that have paid quite a high price, but they've also bought parcels of land which are probably really are too big for them in terms of, if history's going to repeat itself, you would say that they've may have put a noose around their neck in going forward. So that might hurt a few people along the way, but that'll probably be part of the process of the rationalisation of land prices again.
On land prices.
Yeah.
On land prices, I just did a paper, and the title of it about land prices was "This Too Will Pass." Just reminding people that it doesn't always just keep going up. It'll plateau, it'll ease off, it'll drop. Things can go up, things come down. And it's only when you've seen it happen over a few decades that you actually know that.
Yeah, I did 2 workshops for a company that has branches in Horsham and Jakarta 2 years ago, I think 2.5 years ago, and I drew up what I thought was the likely next 10 years, and I encapsulated just the immediate past 2 years in that 10 years, and it showed that capital growth for those 2 years was 29%, but then it backed off a little bit in price, and then it recovered a little bit, but over the 10 years, it came back to 6 to 7% compound growth. So in my opinion, that compound growth that had just boomed, which everybody saw happen, that's sort of bringing forward future compound growth, bringing that back to now, but over a longer term, I still think it'll still balance out at that 6 or 7%. And when you look at the 100-year stock exchange thing, there's a similar message there too.
Yeah, it's interesting. From 1950 to 2000 in farm management, when we did budgets in Australia, we never actually factored in any real capital gain. It kept up with inflation, don't worry about that, but there was no real capital gains. The last 20 or 30 years, there's been real capital gains of 6 and 7%, as Ken says, and that's similar to returns in the long-term returns in the share market, 6% real, right? Take the inflation off. So owning agricultural land has now become as good an investment as anything else in the economy. And then you farm it well, you'll get another 3%, 4%. Next thing you're looking at 10% with a similar volatility as the share market. I think that has been the change. Like it's world population growth, it's economic growth, but agricultural land has now become a good asset that's held its value, whereas before it just kept up with inflation. I'd actually, when I'm doing sums now, I'm saying, well, you've got your land business, it'll tick over 4, 5, 6%. Let's look at your farming business, and that's when we talk about 1%ers and all that. See if we can get another 3 or 4% from farming. Put it both together, and you can see why. If you own plenty of agricultural land, it's a bloody good asset to own. But there is a price at which it is too high, and that's when you back off and act strategically and wait till things cool off a bit,
Linton, you got a question?
Yeah, look, just looking at some of the sale reports for land and who's been buying them, you're seeing a lot of people, or there's a lot of companies now purchasing agricultural land for carbon, and also there's superannuation funds still going in, buying, according to the reports that we're seeing online on rural land sales. So with that outside influence, is that going to override so is that going to override the agricultural value of the land?
Can I have a go at that? I was at a meeting at Winchelsea on Friday and talking to 100 farmers, 110 farmers, and they were very interested in this question and kept coming up. My take on it was the best thing you can do is do what you're best at. And if you're good at farming, then giving that up to play around with carbon and stuff, it's a high-cost caper. When you say money chasing land for carbon, I'm thinking, yeah, sure, northern country where there's hundreds of thousands and millions of acres, that might be the game. But down here, if you're in good country where it rains, farming's the way to go because that's what you're best at, and that's what you do far better than playing around with carbon, at least until carbon hits 150 or 200 bucks a tonne or something. If you could, so my take is do what you're best at, and don't let carbon thinking drive your farming, because you're best at farming if you're in good country. And if it rains a lot, where you can put a bit of carbon into trees, and you should be putting carbon into soil anyway, that's good farming. And that's been known since the ancient Greeks, right? But if it rains a lot, you're better off growing your agricultural products than trying to grow carbon, is my take on it. And pay some other bugger to put the carbon away for you, which is where the Northern Australia might come in. So I just don't know, like there's biodiversity stories going to come into it and all that, but I don't know if it really will apply in the settled, good farming areas. You're still going to be better off farming is my judgment at this stage, at least at current sorts of prices we're looking at for carbon.
That sort of brings us a little bit to the question of. Sorry, Lyndon, keep going.
No, go on, Ferg.
No, we'll finish that out. You go.
No, it's just that it's not the farmers that I was thinking about that are putting the land in and looking for the carbon. It's the outside investors, like the other corporates, that are now investing in agriculture to actually offset their carbon within their main core business. That's going to drive things, as I see it, and put a lot of the agricultural land out of the reach.
Yeah, well, you may well be right. I can see that happening in the north, where it's not productive land, but you've got thousands of acres that you could say, well, I'm not going to graze it, and I'll shoot the cattle, and you'll get paid to do so. So I can see plenty of profit up there, but I can't see it outbidding good farmland in the hands of good farmers.
It sort of brings us a little bit to when you say do what you're good at. Just walked off a farm where sort of we had the discussion around, I guess, enterprise mix or mixing enterprises at all, where, I mean, most business consultants will tell you to do one thing well. It'd be good to hear varying opinions about whether one thing well, or, I mean, most or much of agriculture has been mixed livestock and cropping, but that's certainly changing a lot, particularly where we grew up, where everyone would have had a shearing shed, whereas now a lot of them aren't required. Thoughts around the room on that.
One of the things, Ferg, I reckon with sheep operations is, where 20 years ago we had quite a few wethers in the system. Now there's lots of farms that are wall-to-wall ewes, and they just lack a little bit of flexibility to go with the seasons. It's all very well to understock to account for poor seasons, but we've certainly got to run a certain amount of stock. So, I think we've got to try and be, some sheep operations need to be more flexible. But the other thing we saw pre-Christmas was, how many farmers just offloaded lambs because they didn't want to be holding them and trying to feed them and then running out of feed for their autumn feed for their ewes and stuff like that. But there's a sort of a growing trend in the Western District of Victoria to run a certain number of ewes, or run it maybe close to optimum, but on good years bringing in trade steers or whatever to actually give it a bit more flexibility. So I think
it's an interesting question in that the whole question of diversification versus specialisation, right? Now, Australian farming traditionally was mixed farming, mainly for income reasons. Something was bad, something else would be okay usually. They weren't all that well correlated. But I like the idea of being really good at something and specialising in that, but having your portfolio diversified. You don't diversify on the farm out of what you're good at into something you're not much good at or don't like. So you might do what you're best at on the farm, but get some of your bloody assets, even as a sort of just a passive investment. Just get some of your assets out of the farm, and that can be your diversification. Okay, well, sometimes your diversification is because the two activities on the farm complement each other, and it used to be that a few sheep were a fundamental part of the cropping system. Well, that's not necessarily so now, but it still can be. But the idea of specialising as a way of managing risk on farm, but getting some of your assets off farm to diversify. So you do both. If you get me, you do both, specialise and diversify. But being really good at what you do on farm, like I've always said, the best thing to manage risk is to be technically really good at farming. And I saw a comment the other day from someone who knows a bit more about investment than I do. Warren Buffett said, risk comes from not knowing what you are doing. And to me, you can easily diversify out of what you're really good at and be doing stuff in a half-baked manner. I don't think nowadays that works. We got away with it for 50 years, but I'm not quite sure you get away with it now. It seems to me it's so complex anyway that you've got to specialise to be really good at what you do. But at the same time, I still see a role for the livestock in some systems, even if someone else runs the livestock and you just bring them in when you need them into your place. So, every system will have its own little mix.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Bill, in the fact that being good at what you're doing, and I've always been reminded that diversification can end up being diversification, which is, we don't really want to see that. But I think when you talk about specialisation, it's not just in production, but it's in marketing and all the other aspects of what you do. I've seen a lot of people who have been very good at producing it, but very poor at marketing. And when you're selling a commodity like lamb, where there's basically just two specs on it, weight and fat score, and every farmer is a competitor as well as but he has to be a cooperator to be able to learn off other farmers new techniques and new ways of doing it. But it's interesting to look at, say, a bloke like Tom Bull with his clients now with using Hampshire Downs rams over his prime lines, and his eating quality, and that is now recognised, and he's exporting to America and getting a substantial increase on that. So we don't want to end up being a full bottle on marketing and not being able to produce the product. We certainly need to be good at that, and we need to make sure that our cost of production's there, so that we know what it is. And it was interesting, years ago, a guy run past me. He said, "Ken's, what's 5 plus 5 plus 5?" And I said, 15. And he said, "No, it's not." He said, "It's 60. And I thought, "Oh, yeah, you better tell me what it is." And I think he was idealistic when he was explaining it to me, but he said if you could improve your production by 5%, that's both, and improve your marketing 5%, and have the ability to drive your costs down by 5%, you'd end up with 60% more profit. So that's a very idealistic way of looking at things. But if every farmer had to do that, and then they had to say to them, well, what is it really going to cost you? Or, you know, if you drive your costs down, what impacts are going to have on your production? How are you going to get 5% more out of a market when you're producing a commodity where that's extraordinarily difficult? But I still think it's a useful exercise to put yourself through. And in the end, you may not be doing 5%, 5% and 5%. You might be doing 2 here and 3 there and 1 somewhere else. But those few percent add up to quite a few tens of thousands of dollars in the bottom line.
It just reminds me what I forgot to mention in my little discussion then on specialisation and diversification, is it really comes back to attitude to risk. Because it's well established that if you diversify within the farm, you'll have a lower average income, but it'll be less variable. If you specialise, you'll have a higher average income, but it'll be more variable. Now, depending on the makeup of the farmer and their stage of life and succession and all that, it might suit to have a lower average income that varies less by diversifying. Or if I'm really going for it, I might want to take more risk and it might suit to specialise. So when people say, should I specialise, should I diversify, there's no answer. It comes back to what's your appetite for risk?
Good point, Bill. A lot of this things we're talking about comes around or is sourced from good decision making. And as a small business owner and one that works with lots of other small business owners, I think it can be pretty lonely at the top, as in you sort of, if you come out of corporate environment, there's lots of structures around you that support decision making, whereas in small business that's not there. What are the practices we see used by people to, I guess, to get people around them to help them make those decisions that aren't non-biased decisions? I suppose there's plenty of people around that will make a biased decision for you, but how do you help people make a non-biased decision for you?
A lot of people.
Ken's got more experience here than me. You go for it, Ken.
Well, I've been rabbiting on for 20 years about the role of mentors in our life, and I always reckon if a farmer wants to be a better farmer, they've got to mix with better farmers than what they are. How do you actually determine whether they're better farmers than you? I've, in my consulting time, I've been invited out to do a consulting job on a farm when, the family drive the latest model car and, they're dressed well and things like that. And when I have a look at the books, it's all a bit of a smoke screen. So, it's to determine who are good farmers and try to get to the bottom of that. And quite often you can determine that when you go to field days and you listen to the questions that certain farmers ask, and, you get talking to them and you can sort it out. So I reckon one of the most important things is, like, mentorship can come free of charge, and usually it's unbiased, but you've still got to make a judgment as to the quality of it. But if you can get a mentor that's strong where you're weak, then I reckon that's a good starting point. But remember, in everything you do in life, it all starts with you. It's inside your head. You've got to want to do it. It's your attitude, and it's how bad you want what you're chasing. So, I see a lot of in my situation when I go around and Like I had a lifetime U group in a certain area last week, which will remain anonymous, and they're all well heeled, and the young people have, I got a bit angry with them after the first farm that we were on, and I said, you blokes just not having a go. You're just not trying. How do you expect to improve in life when you're like this? And so I had to turn my strategy around in terms of my teaching, and I turned it back on them, and I got them to lead the discussions and be asking the questions amongst themselves. So there is still a hell of a complacency, and I reckon what's happened in the last few years, and I might add that the area that I was working in that situation was a bloody highly reliable area. So, yeah, I reckon, I don't think, advice that costs you, like something that's $10,000 can be cheap, and something 1,000 can be bloody dear. And so it's looking for value. So don't be afraid to pay for advice, but certainly do your homework on the source of that advice before you actually engage it.
Yeah, that my old mentor Jack Makem was one of the founders of the consulting profession in Australia. Jack always said he was a professional.
I just got a message from computer cut out. Be back soon, he says. So we'll continue the discussion.
Yeah, right. He's looking like he's got the pose of knowledge there anyway, which is
good. I think taking off from where Bill is, if each of the people like on the screen could actually identify a big improvement that they've made in their business in the last 10 years, how did that actually happen? And who was the person who was involved, who helped you the most or influenced your decision making? And what is it, the characteristics of that person that you can identify? Because maybe there's more of those people out there that you should be sourcing for the next 10 years.
good question, Ken. Who's going first?
So, Justin, you've sat there and looked pretty relaxed.
He dropped his camera as soon as you asked a question, mate.
Did he?
I'm back, Ken.
If he was anything like his brother, we wouldn't be able to shut him up, but he's the quiet one.
I am the quiet one. I consider things a bit more, perhaps.
Right. Yeah.
It's an interesting question you ask. It's hard to really put a finger on anything. Yeah. I'm a bit stumped at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's all right. I think sometimes, quite often you get challenged by a question, and it's not until you've revisited it 2 or 3 times that something good can come out of it.
Yeah, well, that probably happened to me about six months ago with one of the blokes on the screen. He threw out a few interesting questions, and we revisited them a couple of nights ago. So, I think in what we do, just embracing a bit more change, and sourcing the people that are going to be able to drive us in the right direction or help us with going in that direction.
Yeah.
And that's on a livestock front, and we've put a fella in who used to be our bank manager as our finance help now, just to try and streamline things on that front.
So what does the role that person have? You got a board? Are they on the board?
No, it's not a board, Ken, like a lot of people will have. It's more just a person we had a good relationship with who's now working with our family, trying to drive forward exactly what Bill was talking about with off-farm investments or diversification in other areas to what we do. And he's handling all that side of it for us. So what we do well, and what we've been doing poorly, taken his help on board to steer us, I guess.
Yeah.
And his expertise and steer us in a certain steer us in the direction we want to go as a family. So that's been a good part. Not so much a board; it's more, picking out individuals that will help us head in the right direction.
Right. Yeah. So, Linton, you've been reasonably specialised, haven't you, for quite a long time? How do you feel about being a specialist?
Look, I agree with that. Because you waste a hell of a lot of energy in other areas trying to do more than one thing right. But last year really sat us on our ass big time, and it's going to take us several years to really recover from that position.
Yeah.
Right. What I was getting at a minute ago before I rudely left you, I apologise for that. I had to plug the cord in. Jack always said 2 heads are better than one, but as an advisor, he always saw him he says the good clients, they had a pretty good idea where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do, and they obviously knew their system far better than anyone. And he always said he couldn't know what was good for someone more than they knew themselves. But he found that the clients really like to have an independent sounding board. Sounding board was the word he used. And I just find that in many walks of life, whether you're running a business or just running your career, as Ken alluded to, finding the right source of advice. Like, bad advice is readily available and cheap. So if you get one or two good people that you can really, that are well worth the money, like there's plenty of consultants out there. You can be a pretty ordinary consultant for a long time, and before you and your clients go broke. So just because someone's a consultant doesn't mean you should automatically pay them a lot of money for their advice. Only pay the best is what I'm saying. And again, one of Jack's sayings was, if you want to buy a stamp, go to the Postmaster General. So just go to the very best, I would. And I think the return on one good decision can save you $1 million, So I just seek out a couple of sources of really good advice. And the other thing I would do alongside that is every day learn something about the area that I'm contemplating. So you've got to do I don't think you can farm out the learning, but you got to do your own learning and then bring in other advice. That's the way I it's pretty bleeding obvious, but by God, it's hard to find those good people that are well worth the money.
Anyone
and
else?
If you do their goal, don't let them out of your sight.
Hopefully they learn how to plug their computer in.
Do as I say, what do I do? For Christ's sake.
Anyone else got a story they'd like to share about a mentor or a turning point?
I'd probably chuck one in there, Ferg. Where we are over in WA, obviously we grow a heap of grass in the winter and the spring, being north of Perth, and then 6 months of drought. This year looks like 8-9 months of drought and 48-degree temperatures. But just talking to people, I pick up lots of little bits and pieces. And one of the things that we did was start using silage instead of hay and lupins and barley, and just trying to control that feed curve. And I probably don't have too many people that mentor me, but just ask lots of questions. See what your mates are doing. Maybe pick up little bits and pieces like that. Another thing that we hadn't done before was belly crutching. We lamb in June, July, and it's very wet, and we normally shear in September. So come June, July, we've got sheep with a lot of wool on them, traipsing around in water, and we started belly crutching last year, and we did a few other things, but lamb survival, we had a really good boost last year, and potentially that's got a part to play with it. So, just picking up little things and trying them, I think, is one thing, and just test and measure. You've got to measure, obviously, the result, and try not to change too many things at once, because then you can't nail what was exactly that was causing the change. But yeah, just test and measure, and we talk to lots of people, pick up little bits and pieces as we go.
One of the questions I'd like to ask Linton is, your fullest sheep are at the top of the rankings in the ASBVs. Where's your next biggest gain in terms of breeding sheep? Is it in the breeding area, or is it in other areas?
Breeding sheep for us, we can't do much better than what we're doing, and it really hurts this year to be selling over 200 rams in the top 5% for meat, and to reposition ourselves. So we've probably got to focus a hell of a lot more on marketing. But go back 12 months ago, the market, we basically thought we didn't have enough rams to sell.
Do you want to explain actually what happened at your sale, or would you prefer not to talk about it?
Oh, look, as far as that goes, we've only sold, out of 400 rams we put up for sale, we sold about 140. And again, like you said, Ken, our genetics are right there. Like our flock average is in about the top 5% of the breed. And we've believed we've been able to, that always being at that level, people would find us and support us and get us through. But last year it just it didn't happen, and I think we've sold 10 rams since October. So we've been really sat on our ass big time. And so when we're selling them for meat, the truckload of 100 rams is giving us about the return of what 1 ram was worth 12 months ago.
If it's any happened before?
No. Everyone's just lost confidence in the industry, as far as I can see, or for our type of sheep.
If it's any consolation, Lynn, we're no different. We're down a couple of hundred or 150 rams on our normal run, and it is just a lack of confidence. Don't doubt your product, because it is just a lack of confidence that has hurt us sheep-wise in this state this year.
Oh, look, we still believe that the best way out is to continue doing what we're doing, and just but the industry's got to gain the confidence. That's the big thing that's happened. Everyone's just lost confidence at the moment. That started to rebuild, but we're still not really seeing people supporting the breeding operation, like with ewes or anything like that at this stage. So I would say there's going to be a hell of a shortage of animals for slaughter come a couple of years' time.
It's a really interesting.
But it's the medium-term outlook that matters, isn't it?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, it's a good. Oh, so Bill said that's the medium outlook that matters, not the short-term outlook, which is an interesting. So what we're seeing right now is lots of people making maybe medium to long-term decisions based on a very short-term issue, and I guess probably what maybe caught everyone by surprise this year was like the best advice we can always give is to act early on a potential outcome rather than sort of see it to the bitter end and be left. But unfortunately, everybody did that this year, and confidence got shot. So it was, I mean, it's a very, I don't know, I certainly haven't seen anything like it in my career. This last sort of six months was the toughest period, particularly for seed stock, but for everywhere, and that confidence ended up on seed stock prices. But I guess we're seeing a lot of people. We've had people pretty much sell their entire stud based on 1 year's ram sale not turning up like last year, and you kind of, I don't know. It's, to me, I think your decision to stick to your guns until it becomes a trend. It's not sensible to throw everything out with what based on one outcome.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen a more dramatic drop in confidence than I saw this year. One question I got for you, great Mallee minds, is we've improved the farming skills through the Mallee, and it's been to the detriment of the livestock industry. In some, like, as a person, I've got no problem saying that it's been affecting us. Do you think that they'll ever go back to running more stock in the Mallee, or is it done and dusted? She's over. Shut the blinds and walk away, because that seems to be the one area that has really had a dramatic change in farming.
Yeah, well, if you look at the
Well,
when we go back to the sheep population, 180 million sheep in Australia, when we had variations of good seasons and our numbers flowed up and down, a lot of that flow was in the mixed cropping country. The full-on grazing people still run the same number of ewes. So now we've got, with the machinery side of it on what used to be a mixed cropping operation, like you had a stranglehold through that Mallee region of South Australia, Justin, and you still have a strong presence there. But, you know, when they go full cropping, and then they haven't put the infrastructure has just gone now. Some of the machinery sheds are unrecoverable. A lot of the fences are not there. The water supply is not there. And the profit margin in the sheep side of it, I don't think is there in the shorter term anyhow, to justify going back the other way. And if they do go back the other way and have livestock, their unit cost on their machinery is going to get higher, because they now want as many hectares as they possibly can to spread the cost of that big header or whatever. So in the next 3 to 5 years, I think, like, if it was only just a small amount of capital expenditure to go back the other way, then I would say yes. But I think there's a lot of farms that have just, from a sheep point of view, had their infrastructure run down that much that it's going to cost probably too much to go back into it.
One of the biggest things we've found, Ken.
Yeah, it's telling that.
Sorry, one of the biggest things we've found, Ken, is that it hasn't actually been people, because you're right, we used to have a great stronghold through the Mallee. We don't anymore because there's no sheep there. But it's mostly because of outside influences. It's not so much been the sheep, it's been the contractors on the shearing that have caused the people to walk away from sheep. It hasn't necessarily been that the sheep have been run down or forgotten, or we've had cases of people putting in new sheds, new shearing yards, confinement pens in 1 year, and the next year they've had the shits on with the shearers because they were charging too much, and sheep are gone.
Yep.
Yeah, I've noticed there's a couple of things happening. One is the economies of scale are with cropping, obviously, and so that explains the big switch anyway that's happened right across Australia. But there's a sort of a skills and generational thing too. If you haven't got young people growing up wanting to and learning to be sheep people, it's not likely to come back in a big way. So the other thing I want to say, though, we've just come off, as I said at the start, the perfect storm of prices and yields for crop and sheep and everything. So people's expectations have to adapt downwards. But I would have thought good stud breeders could, if they can't make a reasonable money at sort of long, medium-term prices, anyone can make good money at the high prices we've had, but you're good at your business. There's got to be a living in it for you at the typical sort of long, medium-term prices. So I'm surprised at the sort of the collapse that you're talking about, because it's always gone up and down. That's part of farming, you know.
Yeah, I might speak out of school here, and Lyndon will belt me later on. But in Lyndon's case, the year before, he had a huge, large-scale corporate client come in and buy a hell of a lot of rams, and it pushed his price up. So, and they just didn't come back this year. And of course, some of the clients from previous years who then found that the rams were probably a bit expensive for their liking, they perhaps didn't turn up, and there's a couple of others that didn't rock up for the sale either. So it's sort of become a victim of his own success in some ways, in that regard. Joe, you've been pretty quiet, so I reckon you should have a
crack. Regression to the mean. Yeah. Oh, no, well, I was going to say regression to the mean. You've got to be able to make a good return on capital at medium-term average type prices and make good money occasionally and enough to get through the bad times. So we've just come off the biggest prices and yields and rain and everything ever. So no wonder everything's gone down, but I wouldn't think there's any reason to be despondent.
Joe's just gearing up to build sheep to Mallee again.
Where are you,
Return to the normal.
Joe's turned his computer off now as soon as you talk to him, mate.
One of the questions were posed in a document that come my way is, where is the big next step? I still think that individual animal identification's got to be a go. We've got to get probably more efficient ewes, particularly in the wool-based merinos. We've got to be still working on our ewe wastage. In quite a few of the properties that I go to, they could have 30% of their ewes that don't rear a lamb. Then in that, saying that is, they might have 3 or 4% deaths, they might 7 or 8% dry at the scan, and then there might be 15 to 18% lose their lambs. So, I reckon that's, I remember when I first met Justin's parents about 35 years ago, there's a lot of people you'd think in 35 years would be able to get where they were 35 years ago, but they're not. And, the wool-based merino has still got a long way to go, I reckon. But it all comes back to the individual manager improving their knowledge and their ability and implementing correct. Like we can have the best idea in the world, but if it's not implemented correctly, then it becomes an ordinary decision.
And the other thing about intensification, we have been intensifying, but the thing about intensification is it'll lift your average income, but also increase the variance around it. And that's what intensification does. High average income, but it's a rougher ride. So we've got to gear up our systems. If we're going to intensify, we've got to gear up our systems to get through the rougher ride as well. And it's fine. You'll end up making more money in the longer term, but you've got to get through a rougher ride because you're more intensive. You've got more inputs, more costs, more at risk, all of that. So there is a trade-off between how intensive you want to push a system and how rough a ride you can wear.
In terms of land use change, it's interesting to drive around Southland of New Zealand where you've got so you've got these really old dairies where it used to be a dairy industry, and then they all became sheep farms. And now every corner's got a little dairy. It used to be a little butter factory or whatever. And then you've got a big scale dairy now built over at the sheep farmers that bought the dairy farms are now converting to dairy farms again. And so, I think obviously there is a cycle. And I guess to answer Justin's question around the Mallee, that I think as technology changes, and I'm biased obviously because I grew up in the Mallee, and my brother's probably the only one left there that likes sheep much. But I think technology change, the opportunities will, like if you can grow 4 tonne of dry matter, it might not get to as if the goidal land shifts a bit, coming like there's every indication is it's not going to get wetter in the Mallee, and I think technology has kept yields going up and kept people. But I think there's every possibility that the dry areas become sheep areas again, and things change again. I don't think. I'm not giving a hope on those areas yet. But I think that's definitely a biased view. But I think I always thought that there was money in 4 tonne of dry matter in the Mallee with livestock if it was utilised properly, and the technology has stopped us utilising that dry matter because we can't. You couldn't physically put up the infrastructure in terms of fences to farm that properly, to utilise that dry matter properly. But if technology changes in terms of how we can manage stock on areas, then all of a sudden you can make that an efficient use of dry matter. It's interesting driving around lots of South Australia and like the real aversion to running high numbers on light soils for obvious reasons in terms of erosion. But there's times of the year where you can run high numbers, obviously. And so, I think it's interesting. Like everyone you talk to in the lighter country areas in South Australia says, well, we can't run optimum stocking rates because we'll do too much damage to our soils. And I wonder how much that's been challenged. I don't know. Tim was on before. He might be able to tell me a lot more. But it feels like that's a systems problem, not a definite problem.
But the fact still remains that with livestock, feed and labour are pretty much direct costs, and you just don't have the same scope for economies of size as the cropping job does. But there's countries that it's only good for livestock. But you mentioned dairy farming. I must be the only Mallee man around who has been an ex-dairy farmer, and I can tell you there's no such thing as an unhappy ex-dairy farmer.
Come on, Joe, you've got to give us your thoughts. What's your biggest challenge going forward?
Well, I'm with Proway, and what we're seeing is we're exactly what we've been talking about. Like about a month ago, drove from Wagga to Temora and back through Coolum, and I saw 3 mobs of sheep, and that really struck me how that's changed in the last 10 years. And then we're seeing a bit of a swing to around Wagga, and that is there's been a few large composite flocks dispersed, and they're just going straight cattle. And but you're right, it's if people haven't got good infrastructure and if they haven't grown up with sheep, they're not likely to get into them or get back into them.
Well, we're down to 65 million or something, aren't we?
But the other, you get all the government sort of stuff that goes on, the $150,000 write-off. Well, that's been happening when farmers have had money in their pocket and they've been spending up, and, it's incredible how many farmers can turn a want into a need, if they've got the right salesperson barking in their ear. I reckon there's been what have you noticed, a hell of a drop in your sales of sheepyards and that?
Oh, for sure. That's right. Like we're still trying to get through the backlog. We've still got probably 12 months work in front of us, but that's in the last 5 months, it's just tapered right off. And that's right. It was confidence. It was, we had we probably build 20 shearing sheds a year or maybe more. And that's, next year we might only, I don't know, that'll be right back then, might be 5 or 6 or something like that. And it's all changing. Like what we're seeing now is more, there was a time there when people were advertising their infrastructure, trying to get employees, and that was good for us, but infrastructure's changing. Shearing sheds these days are becoming more multi-purpose. People want large covered yards, and because there's a bit of uncertainty of shearing, how it's going to happen, that type of thing. So they're going for large covered yards and a flexible sort of shearing area that might change in the future.
But
we're seeing
the more people get out of it, the better it is for those who stay in it. So, good thing too.
But we're seeing a lot more pneumatics, hydraulics in yards. It's like the bulk handler and pneumatics in cattle yards, and that seems to be the way things are going because people haven't got the label. With husbandry, with livestock handling skills. So they're just investing in more pneumatics and that type of thing.
The whole labour thing's big, I reckon.
What's that?
The labour story is a big one, I reckon.
Yeah, for sure. Like
skilled labour, gold.
I think even in the labour side, is sheep producers can make a difference in hiring female staff compared to some cattle operations that we serve here. So, I've got a farm worker, single mum. She can handle sheep with a dog. They seem to be, I don't know, probably generalising here, and Sophie can probably smack me around a little bit, but females tend to be really good with stock, and blokes love tractors. Now, I'm not saying there's not females that work really well in the machinery side, but I think there is an avenue there for female farm workers with livestock, and I think that's something that as an industry we should be really advocating and trying to use people's skill sets the best they can. I think females with livestock works really, really well.
And that's where things like pneumatics become important.
Handling equipment needs to be able to cope with those type of stuff. So we use auto drafters and good yards, and making sure that we've got back ease hoists on vehicles, so you're not having to lift heavy stuff. We're doing it smart, and that does make it easier. And you can get good staff. You can get really good staff if you've got the right infrastructure.
The other thing with staff, I think we're going to have to it's no longer just about the wages. It's about a lot of other things in terms of flexibility and even to the point of equity partnerships or profit sharing or whatever. I think we've got to be thinking that way. Like you look at all the other industries, when they're short on capital, they'll go onto the stock exchange to extract money from the public to build their businesses. I reckon we've got to get to that point now, and I've got a few that I've been involved with, and even they're only small scale, where an employee on a farm is running quite a few breeding cows, but when he gets to a certain size, he'll be leasing his own property, hopefully, but he's sort of leasing within the farm that he's already working on, and that provides probably another it could be another 30% on top of what he earns as a wage, and the beauty of that is it sort of has an element of retention about it. You retain the staff member because they've got an investment. Another one's got a 50% share in the boom spray on the farm, and so the owner owns half and the employee owns half, but the employee runs it as a contracting business on the understanding that the other half share owner or the property owner, his crops are sprayed on time, so he's got the opportunity to earn some more capital and even to the point of getting lease blocks that can be use the machinery off the farm where he's employed and pays a contract rate, and can grow a little bit as well, because I just see there's farms where, like the family farm, if you look at it like a pyramid, if the owner, they're right up the top of the point of the pyramid, you know, there's only so far an employee can go in a business. And in some cases, I would think that the employee would be better managing it and the owner step down and go to a lower level, but that never really happens. But yeah, so given the restrictions on family farms, like if you're in a corporate one, well, you know, there might be an opportunity to manage other parts of the corporate operation, but in family operations, it's a little bit difficult. And now with probably the average family size only being 2 children, we've got to get workers outside of you know, young people outside of agriculture to get interested in agriculture. And, you know, from a political point of view and farmer body point of view, we're not all that bloody strong in that area to help drive the interest of perhaps city people in agriculture.
I think the two things that I see that, you know, getting people to move industries is that they're attracted to a good training program and good WA Connect program. I see farms that haven't got either of those, and I think they're going to really struggle going forward.
I saw in the New Zealanders are great at creative remuneration packages where people can build up equity within the business, like as a way of keeping the right people and also getting the incentives right. You get these profit share arrangements which become reinvested as your share of equity. And I saw some really creative designs there in New Zealand. They're way ahead of us in many ways. But the other thing about it's not just about the wages. I've seen lots of surveys and all sorts of businesses, and you know where wages comes in and the list of things that are important? Usually about number 18 or 19 or 20. And up the top is, you know, respect, thanks, you did a good job, training, all those culture things. And the word culture is thrown around, but if you can get the culture of the business right and the incentives right for the right people, you'll keep the right people, you know. But Australian farming or agriculture hasn't been particularly creative or good at getting all that stuff right because, well, for a long time, labour wasn't the shortage it is now. And so, to me, there's a huge area that we can do better. And the best businesses, their culture is just spot on. Then the staff are really happy. You have no trouble getting staff, keeping staff. And I'd say it's just about getting the culture and the incentives right. And but none of that's easy because it comes down to the personality of the people in charge.
And the other thing is with you can get a good employee, provide them with all the incentives, 3 to 5 years, and they want to move. And quite often that move won't be instigated by themselves. It'll be because their wife has got a profession and she wants progression or wants to promotion in some area. So it becomes a no-win situation. I've been involved with clients where they've literally thrown the kitchen sink at the employee, but he still walked because of other factors that were out of their control.
How are we going for questions out there, team?
I've got another one for you, Ferg. I don't want to hog the show, but what's it going to take to actually rebuild the confidence back in the industry? Because, while there's no producer confidence, they're not competing in the market, so it's just left up to the processors to set the price. And it's only once we have producer competition that price actually lifts off of what the processors are, the least that they're able to pay us. So, as I see it, we have to gain confidence back amongst producers to get a viable industry again.
Who's going to answer that, or am I left to?
Yeah. It was directed to you, Ferg.
Yeah, right. I think it's interesting. I reflect on the privilege, I guess, to cross the ditch all the time, and so I see the confidence both sides, and it's not often like they're independent experiments almost, because there's not a strong influence of one over the other, and so New Zealand was flat because of government regulation, and so the way that we've made money forever in ag, as Bill pointed out, is intensification. And when you tell people they can no longer intensify because you put nutrient caps on them, it sort of leaves you at sea, because you really don't. It sort of puts a cap on how much more you can extract within the boundaries of the farm, which is completely foreign to anything any of us know about ag, except luckily it does leave genetics as an option, so just get that plug in there. But yeah, we've seen meat companies in New Zealand sort of write down themselves to a $90 million loss or $100 million loss or whatever this year, so they held up prices while arguably the Australians gouged and made profits but dropped the price. So yeah, there's been a big dent in confidence. Some of it was led by government in New Zealand, and then by commodity prices, and the perfect storm that we all know about with El Nino called and prices dropping. Everyone, yeah. So I don't know. For me, we went into a period where people couldn't get shearers. El Nino was called, and prices went through the floor. So the natural decision was to leave. But then equally, I've heard of, and I hate talking about heard of, I mean, there's I know the name of the person who's gone into sheep in WA because it was a cheap time to buy in. So I think humans are tenacious, and we'll see opportunity. And there's scanned in Lamb News at $100 now if you've got grass a bit. So I don't think fundamentally, I haven't seen anything that's different fundamentally. I've seen a lot of people belted around and lost some confidence, but I think I don't know. I'm fairly bullish about what the next 3 years hold. I'm not that excited about what the next 6 months hold, but I think beyond that, I think the fundamentals are still strong. Like the world is still eating more protein than it ever has before, and there's a shift towards sustainable. There's a shift away from factory farming. It lends itself to a grass-fed market out of Australia and New Zealand. So I think fundamentally we're in the right game. Whether it looks shiny right now isn't a big concern to me. I think we have to look at what is the human population doing, because I mean that's really beyond. Yeah, we can never. Any 12-month period doesn't tell you anything about what 10 years looks like, and I think if you look at all of the trends, then grass-based livestock farming is right up there with what consumers are saying they want, even though they might not be paying for it right now. I think, I think we'll see shifts, and we can't. It's not going to be a government-based thing. It's not going to be like protesting on the streets is not going to do it. It's going to be brands that demand products that we are able to supply that no one else is able to supply. That's how the world goes. It doesn't change by lobbying or any fundamental shift. It changes by consumers demanding the product that we can supply better than anyone else in the world. That's my glass half full version, anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree totally with that, Mark. Like, as long as we can really grow as much grass as physically in high rainfall, I'm talking now, or medium rainfall, you've got to grow as much grass as you can. Your system's got to be based on grass, and the world demand for protein is going to be strong. Another 3 billion people around the corner. Economic growth goes up and down, but if the exchange rate comes back a bit, tariff barriers are coming down. There's from afar, I'm not in the middle of it, but from afar, I can sit back and point out a heap of medium-term positive signs for someone who's really good at farming and doesn't know what sort of farming you're doing. And so there's no reason why people in the sheep job who are really good at it and growing as much grass as can be grown and consuming it, if they can't make a go of it, well, it doesn't stack up to me, because, as Mark said, the demand's there. It's going to keep growing. We're competitive. Tariff barriers are coming down. We're well placed. And the saying is, act now as if the future you expect is already here. So, there'll be people there. What the question of what it'll take to turn people around, I would have thought decent season and decent prices quickly changes most people's outlook. And I'm growing up in the Mallee, I used to say optimism involves an intellectual flaw, but I don't think that. As long as it rains, I don't think that. Places where it rains.
I think over here in Western Australia, we've obviously had the issues around the live export really scaring people. But, out and about talking to people, I think the people that love sheep will stay in sheep, and I think that'll give them a really good opportunity. The people that have always been maybe on the fence when it comes to should we have sheep, should we not have sheep, is it part of the broad, the broad acre system, and again, stubbles are not what they used to be. Headers clean up pretty much all the grain these days. There's not the spilled grain left for sheep. So I think it's a good excuse for people if they're not keen on sheep to say it's all too hard and I'm going to get out. I hear the shearing argument a lot, and I guess I'm a bit biased. I'm involved in the shearing industry, but it's again, is it an excuse? Is it a bit of an easy way out? I know people have done it tough and haven't been able to find shearers when they really need them. I don't. That's 100% true. But I just wonder if it's the people that go, to be honest, sheep, it's a good reason to get out. But I think that's really going to help the people who want to stay in sheep. The market's going to get better for those people, and I'm very bullish. I see it as a real positive. That's going to shake the industry up a little bit, and the good people will do well, and the people who are not that good on sheep, they'll get out.
Never waste a good downturn. It's easy for me to say sitting here in bloody Ivanhoe in Melbourne, by the way. I'm not running 10,000 ewes and trying to make a quid off them.
Before we get off this, Billy, you've got to give us a report on what the Taylor Swift concert was like.
I thought he'd have his sequence on still.
One person was.
Surely university.
Before we get on to Tay, well, Elise has just pointed out that the shearing job has changed a lot with the people now on wait lists looking for a stand. I think it's this week or next week we've got a shearing contractor on the podcast, and same story. There's a lot of that job has changed a lot, and but back to Tay, Bill. If you give us your rundown, that'd be good.
You went in a hotel room from Ballarat to Geelong to Melbourne.
Yeah, my girls all fly home tonight. They were over there at the concert last night.
It would have been the strangest crowd I've ever seen at the MCG. I'm much more interested in going to the MCG when other things are on, I can tell you.
All right. God, you're becoming an old bugger, Billy.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah.
Well,
Ken's taken all the mirrors down out of his place.
Yeah. About 40 years ago. Yeah. But, if we had to summarise what we've been talking about is that a lot of the time I don't reckon we get anywhere in life unless we got the blowtorch on our backsides. Now, the degree at which the burn comes from that, we can get burned by external forces and things like that. But, if it was easy going, then probably the rewards probably wouldn't be there. But if you look at some of the one percenters, and I think I'm probably speaking to the converted, I reckon one of the greatest one percenters is timing of whether that be sowing a crop or selling stock or whatever. And obviously procrastination is probably one of the, on the flip side, if you procrastinate, you could probably lose out. The other area was mentioned about benchmarking businesses and enterprises. I think first and foremost, you just got to make sure that data you're keeping is accurate, and the data that you're actually keeping, you actually use it to make a better decision. I see so many people who benchmark, and all it is a discussion point for them to be able to brag or whatever, and then they try to use it to compare themselves to others. and I'm not totally against that, but the person who's actually running the benchmarking program has got to know what they're doing and make sure that everything, all the data and the benchmarks that they're creating are accurate. I've seen a few benchmarking reports where they've lost confidence in their outcomes, but benchmarking yourself against yourself from one year to another, I think is a fundamental of what you're doing. And for some people, they mightn't be keeping all the records, but I reckon if you're highly experienced with what you're doing, in a roundabout way, you're benchmarking yourself within your own mind, and you just got to make sure that process is reasonably accurate, and that'll be borne out by the decisions you'll make. A lot of people might call it experience, but yeah, if you can. So that's what I think about benchmarking. But I think measuring what you do is fundamental to improvement as you go forward, I think. Like with Linton, with his
measuring things that are actionable.
Yeah,
measuring things that have meaning.
Yeah, like Linton wouldn't have got his Port Leicester sheep to that high level without taking a lot of measurements and recording things along the way.
Yeah, good points, Ken. And I think, my only concern with benchmark is when it gets used to make correlations, looking in the rearview mirror to predict the future from the past, and you can sort of bend, and that's across enterprise. Within enterprise, go for it, and it's an awesome thing when you see consulting groups make calls based on old data. I don't think sometimes that's a fantastic predictor of how other people should farm or how the future will play out. But 100%, you get nowhere if you're not measuring yourself against yourself and using some sort of system to do that.
The vision's clearer through the front window than the back one, but yeah, I agree with you. Comparing yourself with yourself, I'm probably a stone over my best playing weight. But measure, you're saying you can't manage what you don't measure. I have a third angle to that. I say you can't manage what you don't measure and understand. And so just measuring itself is mindless measurements. No, it's got to be actionable, got to relate to something that you can then control and do something about. And the other thing I wanted to say was manage well the risks you can control, all the things you can control. If you manage them as well as you can, the rest will take care of itself because you can't do anything about it anyway.
And Billy, I reckon you're 3 kilograms heavier than what you think you are.
It'd be nice if it was only 3, mate.
I reckon it'd be a bit of a race between you and I. Those 3 figures are pretty close.
That seems like a great opportunity to pull this to a halt. Just want to really thank Ken and Bill for their contributions tonight. I don't know about those two, but I can hang around for a chat if anyone wants to. But yeah, I think it's been a good segue to close it down, and really appreciate their insights, but very much appreciate everyone tonight who's contributed. It's great to have a chat about something we're all passionate about, which is farming generally, but livestock farming particularly. And thanks everyone for the time. Thanks to Sophie for setting this all up, and all the best for the next few weeks. But hang around to get your questions answered, or head off and have dinner or whatever you're up to.